And then maybe like years later, we find out, oh, wow, there's some underlying other diagnoses that are maybe going on. We have a feelings chart that we use a lot too, where we break down our feelings for a younger child, 3 to 0, older child, 5 to 0. We also do want to, give them a reward for handing something over, because for some children, that's a huge deal. We're only really using our native language with family members, but the second they go outside of that, they're shut down.
Welcome back to another episode of the Unspoken Words podcast, a Selective Mutism podcast by the Smart Center, produced and published once again by New Edition Productions. This episode features Dr. Elisa Shipon-Blum and Dr. Jenna Blum, the director and lead clinical psychologist at the Smart Center's growing counseling and assessments department, going back to the foundation of it all. What is SCAT, Dr. E's evidence-based social communication anxiety treatment program, what it is, and just as importantly, what it isn't. Dr. E and Dr. Jenna make the case that how do I get my child to talk is simply the wrong question. The better one instead is, why is my child not communicating in this situation? Something that we've talked a lot about on this podcast. They explain why not speaking is only just a symptom, why selective mutism is really a social communication anxiety disorder, and why the name itself deserves to be thrown in the trash. They unpack the underlying whys that so often get missed, things like ADHD, autism, sensory and speech and language challenges, and why SCAT is a recipe of evidence-based approaches, not just a single therapy. Over the course of the episode, the social communication bridge, the SM evaluation, the feelings chart, motivational interviewing, and the parent's role as a driver of real progress are all brought to life with real stories from a teen at a Phillies game to a 9-year-old who needed structure long after her mutism resolved. If you have any question on anything you hear in today's episode, just head to selectivemutismcenter.org/ask Dr. E. That's ASKDRE. And make sure you're following the podcast on Instagram at @UnspokenWords_podcast and on YouTube at Unspoken Words Podcast by Dr. E. All right, please enjoy the latest episode.
Before we get started with the episode, you're exhausted from advocating, explaining, and hoping someone finally understands. Well, we do. Consider Communicamp for you and your family. Communicamp is the Smart Center's intensive all-day treatment program designed to help children and teens ages 3 and up build social communication confidence. Over the course of one full weekend, your child or teen receives 15 plus hours of expert-led skill building, while parents receive 15 plus hours of training and support. Our clinicians use Dr. E's evidence-based treatment, SCAT, that's helped thousands of individuals find their voice. Here's what matters. Unlike other programs, your child or teen doesn't need to talk to come to camp. We meet them exactly where they are. Visit the link in this episode's show notes to learn more. Stop waiting for your child or teen to grow out of it. All right, enjoy the episode.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Unspoken Words. I'm honored to be here with Dr. Jenna Blum. How are you, Dr. Blum?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. When we were thinking about different episodes, we were thinking, should we do more about the summer? Yeah, perhaps, but we have a lot of episodes on summer, so we want our listeners to kind of go back and listen. How to connect with peers over the summer. We have episodes on that. But then I was thinking, we've gotten a few questions lately to the Smart Center. And I know you and I really didn't talk a whole lot about this before today. But one of the questions was, I want to understand about the treatment approach. I'm a little confused. And is it a separate treatment than other treatments out there? I'm a little confused. So we send this person that reached out resources, and they still needed some clarification. So I thought to myself, let's do an episode on kind of the underpinnings of SCAT, what it really is and what it's not. And the way I thought we would start is with a question. So many people say, how do I get my child to talk? I mean, how many times do we hear that? How do I get my child to talk? I'd love people to ask, why is my child not communicating in this situation? Rather than how do I get them to talk, why are they not? And I would say for me, that was the basis of SCAT. SCAT evolved over a period of time. It wasn't an overnight thing. And it really was a result of when I was working with selectively mute individuals as a physician, started the nonprofit, the Selective Mutism Association, way back when, I really saw it like a lot of people, child not speaking. How do we get them to speak? But the thing is, as I started to work with families through the nonprofit, through working with families to help them, I realized that not speaking was truly just a symptom. And so the question is, why? Why are they not communicating in this situation? And that's the basis for SCAT. It's a conceptualization of the whole person, not just a symptom, but understanding who they are, what is causing the mutism, what is keeping it going, and kind of where are they in this journey in terms of the different settings, in terms of how are they communicating, like a baseline, which
Mhm.
is how the social communication bridge evolved. So you've been in this field for over 10 years, pretty solid as a clinician, as you went through many years working as a Communicamp counselor at Communicamp, working with families, treating families, working with kids, teens, and adults. So you've been in it. You lecture at Communicamp, you do it all. So in your words, how could you describe this to somebody?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times I almost like to explain how selective mutism is, if you think about it as like a cake, right? And if you think about how you go to a bakery and you see like a display of cakes, right? You might say, oh, okay, like this one looks nice, that one looks nice, that one looks nice, right? But they all have different ingredients. And I think that, you wouldn't just grab a cake, right? But rather you might want to know, well, let me learn a little bit more about what this cake is all about, right? And so I think that when I explain that a lot of times to families, I actually think it really helps them with that visual because it's almost like a recipe, we always say. Like,
Do you think
everyone
maybe
would
they're thinking about eating the cakes? Because when you started
maybe.
talking about cakes, I was like, well, wait, what kind of cake? So you're right. The first thing that I thought of is, wait, it looks good on the outside, right? But what's inside? What is it? Is
Yeah.
it chocolate, vanilla, strawberry? Is there a little mocha in there? Are there little chocolate chips in there? What makes that person who they are? What makes that cake who they are? So that's a good analogy. But go ahead. Sorry for interrupting, but I started thinking about cakes.
No, that's okay. I mean, you kind of just said it though. I think like a lot of times we have to be thinking about all of those types of ingredients and if we don't think about those ingredients, we miss potentially like a pivotal piece of what kind of puts all those pieces together. So I do think that those underlying whys of selective mutism are so important. And what's really fascinating is so many times we'll get children that we work with and they might overcome certain aspects, but maybe we have a little bit of some question marks in terms of some of their underlying whys. And let's say a family at that time is like, I think they're fine. Like, we don't necessarily need to work on certain things. And then maybe like years later, we find out, oh, wow, there's some underlying other diagnoses that are maybe going on. That's what was creating some of that shutdown, years back when. And that's just one scenario. I'm not saying that happens for everyone, but it just gives you that picture that we really do want to conceptualize. We really do want to kind of dive deeper. And I think that's one reason why people have shared they enjoy, this type of approach and they enjoy this type of treatment because we don't just look at that symptom of talking, right? We obviously discuss it a lot and we talk about talking, right? But we do it in a way where we try to understand and we go underneath that. And I think in doing that, we're able to, instead of just kind of putting that band-aid on and saying, okay, here's a strategy to help with that, we talk about all of those challenges, right? Because let's say you have a child that has a learning processing challenge. If we're just expecting them to talk and we give them an intervention in school and we're like, okay, you got to tell your teacher, 5 things about what your favorites are, a child with a learning processing challenge is going to really struggle with that. And that's not because they, don't want to share that with their teacher. They might just need someone to help them break that down. They have some processing concerns. So they might need a choice to kind of bring them in because there's too much time to think and process. So if we don't know those things, how can we help our children succeed? So I think that, going back to your original question, I just think a huge piece of SCAT treatment is those underlying whys. And when discovering that, we're now able to kind of take that first step into treatment.
I want our listeners, now these are great points. I want our listeners to just take the word SM, and I say this at Communicamp all the time. And I even have a visual because I have a new presentation. And one of those visuals is the word SM, and you see somebody tossing that word, selective mutism, into a trash can. And I may have listeners going, wait, what? What do you mean throw it in a trash can? Like, this is your expertise. This is why we're listening to you. And here's why. The name stinks. It's a horrible name for what this is. It's a social communication anxiety that has factors into the development of SM, what may be causing it, and then factors into, and it could be those initial factors that caused it that are maintaining it. Like you said, an underlying why. Maybe the child has sensory processing, speech and language challenges. Perhaps they are neurodivergent and maybe they have ADHD or dyslexia or autism spectrum disorder. And so many people are focusing on the symptom rather than the underneath and understanding. So,
Mhm.
SM is a social communication anxiety disorder that has factors into the development and maintenance of SM. It's a whole person approach. It respects the baseline stages, whether they're shut down, they're nonverbal, they're using transitional strategies such as the verbal intermediary or sounds to words or augmentative devices, or they're quiet one or two words, or they're elaborative, initiative, and responsive and expressive. And it really ranges. And if we can get that baseline, which is our social communication anxiety inventory, to really understand that base, then we have a starting point. Like, you can't start at initiative, elaborative, and expressive and expect that from somebody that isn't necessarily even engaging or able to comfortably point or nod or even comfortably speak. Like,
Mhm.
even if they're speaking one or two quiet words, how can we get them there yet? There's so many different strategies to use and respect what those whys are, because we may have to accommodate it.
Right.
Something as simple as kids with speech and language, 30 to 40%, they do well with the write and read or script approach, because they don't, if they have an expressive language disorder, open-ended, thought-provoking questions, trying to explain things can be really difficult. So more that they prepare for it, the more that they have visual supports, the more they can write and read. I mean, I have a lot of kids with speech and language that once you ask them questions in the right way or give them time to write and read, they do great. And that confidence helps them. So I want our listeners to understand. And then what we do is, because it's a whole person approach, and we're understanding their whys. And that's the value of the selective mutism eval. So for families that come to the Smart Center, the first step is the selective mutism evaluation, or if they're in a state that we're not licensed, the selective mutism interview. Because in those assessments, we're learning about them, their development, their past, their parenting style, how a parent parents. We're learning their baseline stages. We're really ruling in and out various whys, the quad, sleeping, eating, behaviors, toileting. All of these make up a person. Their
Mhm.
family dynamics, all of this matters. So when we treat someone, we are treating the person and not a symptom. And that is the most, in my mind, comprehensive way. That doesn't mean that we're not using all the evidence-based strategies. We are. So
Mhm.
touch upon the aspect of behavioral therapy alone and how that integrates into SCAT, Dr. Jenna.
So, say that question again.
Yeah, so that's at 10:29. I just want to make sure.
Sorry. I don't know if it's just me, but your internet was going in and out a little bit.
Oh, no. Okay. I don't know. Could you hear me pretty good?
I could. Your question got a little bit. Can you just say the question again?
SCAT is a conceptualization and an understanding, and it uses a variety of evidence based
Mhm.
treatments within it. You create a recipe of not just one type of therapeutic modality. It's not
Mhm.
just behavioral, it's not just a cognitive behavioral approach, it's not just a systems approach, it's
Mhm.
not just one type. It's a recipe where we grab different types of modalities
Mm.
to treat the person. And I think that's a great way to explain it.
Yeah.
You know, everyone will need something different. Younger children tend to need more behavioral exposure approach, and of course parent training, intense parent management, how to talk to your child, how to support your child, how to facilitate your child, what words do you use, something as simple as avoiding you should and you need to language, how to direct them, how to meet them where they are in a supportive, compassionate, loving, caring way versus you need to, you should, and if you do, just be brave to talk. If they're
Mhm.
not there yet, we can't take that approach. So, with that in mind, let's break down the different types of treatment. We have so many as part of
Mhm.
SCAT. And I know you talk about this a lot when we're lecturing at different conferences and
Yeah.
presentations. So
Yeah.
there you go. You're on stage. Go ahead, Dr. Jenna.
No, I mean, I think CBT is a really big aspect of our treatment. So the cognitive behavioral therapy, and I think one of the reasons for that is we talk a lot about their thoughts, right? Those feelings that are kind of intertwining with those thoughts and how they really act, right? And so for them, a lot of times they're shutting down. Some of our kids, though, interestingly enough, are actually externalizers as well. And we kind of explain that the more, less timid you are, the more underlying whys there might be. So, they don't always have the same presentation, but for the most part, you know that kind of shutdown mode is more of kind of that behavior that happens. And so in our treatment we talk a lot about, like, let's talk about what's going on for you, right? So sometimes parents will give us a call and they'll say, like, are you going to talk about selective mutism with my child? My child doesn't know about this. I want to go about this whole treatment without telling them anything. And we'll say, obviously depending on the age of the child, if we have a 4-year-old coming in, no, we're not necessarily going to grab the DSM and, read the definition of selective mutism to them. But we do talk about the scaries of how it sometimes is hard for us to get our words out, or we do talk about, where they are on the social communication bridge. So for every child, that CBT aspect is us drawing out a social communication bridge for them, talking about those thoughts, right? Showing them where they are more non-verbally, where they're maybe pointing, handing things, giving a head nod, a gesture, right? Writing something and showing it, or drawing it, whatever it might be, texting someone, emailing a professor instead of telling them. Stage 2 is kind of that transitional strategy, right? Where they're more maybe telling parent or telling a verbal intermediary, like a teacher, a peer, a cousin, they tell someone else, or maybe they're starting to make sounds. And that's a way of progression into words. And then also stage 3, which is where they're comfortable using their words, right? And that, like Dr. Reese said, can range from like 1 to 2 words to fully elaborating, could range from whispering to talking very audibly. So there's so many different extensions of the bridge, but we will draw out the bridge with our kids and teens, and we'll talk about that with them, because that is really important. And so that is that CBT aspect where we'll really start to uncover really those underlying thoughts that are going on. Why is it really challenging for us at times, and what are those feelings? And so we have a feelings chart that we use a lot too, where we break down our feelings for a younger child 3 to 0, older child 5 to 0. And really what that is the higher the number, the more scary or the more anxiety provoking it is, and the lower the number, the more comfortable it is. And we talk about those feelings and why those things are really challenging. And so we're not just navigating the world. So yes, like you said, behavioral therapy is also an aspect of it, because we do a lot of exposures. We do ask kids, teens, families to go to restaurants, stores, family gatherings, always be thinking about these type of interventions, exposures, and we talk about how to engage in those different environments. But we're not just throwing you in. We're talking about, well, how did that feel when Uncle Joe came up to you and asked you this question? What did it feel like after you answered the question, right? Because we know.
I mean, in other words, I remember presenting at a conference years ago, and one of the psychologists in the audience raised their hand and go, I don't really think it matters about their feelings. And I'm thinking, well, how successful are you in treating kids and teens and adults? Because what do you mean their feelings don't matter? You're disrespecting them if you don't respect their feelings. That doesn't mean we don't implement silent goals, as we call them, where we're training parents and educators of how to set the world up, how to question, when to question, with who to question, what strategy to bring out. If the child bridges down, how do you help support them to bridge them up, or respect that? Like, there's so much with parent and adult facilitation. I mean, that's so much of our treatment, which is why Communicamp is 15 plus hours at camp while the kids are in camp. Parents are in camp. I'm in
Yeah.
camp too,
Yeah.
because they need to learn.
Yeah.
But it's such an important aspect to demystify, to acknowledge, to assess your feelings and respect that. If a child says it's a 5 out of 5, that means it's a 5 out of 5. Whatever that means to that child, that's causing them to feel uncomfortable, afraid, fearful, scared, whatever it is. Or
Mhm.
as kids get older, it's hard to do. So a 5 out of 5 for a 15-year-old, maybe it's hard to do versus scared, where a 3, 4, 5-year-old feels scared.
Yeah.
Because as we know, they age, the scaries go away and it becomes more of a conditioned response.
Yeah.
But if we just respect them, like, I am amazed how many times I've worked with kids that come with, I would call, like, a lot of skepticism. Why? Because they had seen people, probably locally, who just were, let's just get them out and talk, give them money, give them tokens, take them to Disney, whatever it might be, and be really courageous to do it without understanding where they even are in the process. What are their whys? What are their baselines? And these kids have not succeeded. They failed. So their self-confidence is low. Their sense of self, obviously, low. They're more avoidant. They're more fearful. It's affecting their social, their emotional, their academic, their overall communication confidence, and their ability to do things because they haven't felt successful at all. But when we start to involve them and trust them, and we believe them and we don't question them, but maybe help them understand it. Oh my God, the freedom that comes from that. That's why it's so important that they understand their bridge and they see where they are now and what it feels like with certain strategies and where they were then. It's so powerful. You start to see these kids sitting up a little taller, seemingly more positive, taking risks. And then at the same time, training parents to meet them where they are, to be able to be supportive, compassionate in that kind of way, rather than just trying to get them to talk. And when they
Yeah.
don't, right?
I think that when it comes to like the feelings chart too, we've had parents that will say, oh, well, like if they're never a 5 out of 5 or a 3 out of 3, which is really what we want them to work on, then does that just mean they're never going to do anything? And I, like to unpack that a lot where I say, no, that does not mean that we're not going to work on communication with our teacher, but it might mean, well, if it's, let's say it's a teenager and it's a 5 out of 5 to go up to their teacher and ask a question. No, that does not mean that we don't want to work on that goal, but it might mean what would like a 2 to a 4 range look like for them? Maybe it's emailing their teacher ahead of time, and then maybe a friend goes up with them and they tell their friend and the friend tells the teacher, or maybe they write down the question and the teacher prompts them, and maybe just responding feels easier than initiating, so they're able to do it. Whatever it might look like for them, right? But I think that, like I always say, for an older child, like a 2 to a 4 is kind of that sweet spot, and for a younger child, like a 1 to a 2, because we don't want to always feel like a 0. I mean, of course I would love to feel like that too, but we're growing when we feel a little bit of a push. But it's that happy medium, because if we're always a 5 or if we're always a 3, then we're creating this, what we call like this kind of like avoidance of anxiety, because we don't want to ever experience that. So we just start to avoid, and then that's not doing anything, because now we don't want to approach any scenarios, right? So I think that's something to think about. Is it's not that we never want our children to be working on things. We always want to be working on like that social muscle, but it's more, to what extent are we working, how much, and then when do we need to know to kind of take a step back? So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind. So he talked about kind of the CBT, the behavioral aspect of SCAT. I know Dr. E also touched on, the parent piece of it too. And we do have very extensive parent education, very extensive like parent management work. And we do that up until really even like our young adults. So I work with teens, young adults, and parents are still a really big part of that, because many times our kids are really reliant on us, and as we get older, there's that learned conditioned behavior. They're even more reliant. And so they're very dependent on you. We need to learn, how do we take that step back, right? What can we do to help them navigate the world on their own? And that's why a lot of older kids, independence is a really big part of the treatment plan. We try to build that into it. But
Big piece.
the parent piece is super important. And so we've had conversations with families where I might have a parent drop their child off in the waiting room and they're like, oh, okay, it's the intensive. Like, we'll see you in 4 hours. And I'm like, wait a minute, you're a part of this process. Like, obviously I want to do treatment with your daughter and I want to work with her. And she is obviously a big part. She's older and I want her to navigate, but I also need time with you. So when I do intensives, a lot of times I'll have a supporting clinician with me and I'm working a lot with the child, but then there is a part of this treatment where I'm guiding my supporting clinician to kind of continue doing an exposure with the child. Well, then I bring in the parents for the second half and I'm talking to them. So it's almost like 2 sessions at the same time. And so I do that because I want to talk with you. I want to kind of educate and really hear what is not working, what's working really well, how can we tweak these things, give psychoeducation about like our SM triangle, which, I know we've talked about in other episodes, but that talks a lot about how do we engage with that third person? What's that balance between, too much increased expectation, too little decreased expectation, and kind of like how do we navigate those scenarios? So anyway, the parent piece is super important. I know other approaches utilize parents as well. And the way that we really utilize you is for you to be that part of that process. We want you to help bring your child into communication. So we're not having you enable that necessarily and just talk for them, but we are having you be part of that process, because for some of our kids, it might be too much to just push them ahead and then you're kind of taking that step back. So one of the parent goals we talk about is something called frontline, where you're standing next to them, right? And they're kind of like parallel with you, ready to approach that person. That's kind of that triangle piece. So we can't minimize you guys as parents. And so, yeah, I just want to emphasize that piece, that parent management, kind of that family system approach, is super, super important. We'll get back to the episode in a second. If you have a child or teen with social communication challenges, listen up. For more than 20 years, the SMART Center has helped over 6,000 individuals overcome selective mutism. Now we're bringing our expertise to you in a new way. With our 6-week virtual social skills series, over 6 sessions, your child or teen will learn through activities, role plays, and real life practice by learning conversation starters, developing friendships, and managing social anxiety in a safe and supportive space. Our trained clinicians meet every child and teen where they are, whether nonverbal, finding their voice, or already verbal. We run new groups every few months. Visit the link in this episode's show notes to register your child or teen today. All right, let's get back to the episode.
Well, you've said a lot, and I think for our listeners, I think we should give them some examples of some of the different types. Now, I know we've talked about behavioral CBT, but I want to give examples, and I want to give examples of some parent kind of aspects to this. And also, I want you to talk about the motivational interviewing and the insight-oriented aspect of SCAT. Can you touch on that? And then we'll go into examples.
Yeah, so motivational interviewing is another aspect of SCAT, and that's really important, especially for our older individuals when we might not be experiencing as much motivation to work through goals. Maybe we've been working on treatment throughout most of our life and we just feel comfortable, or it feels too scary or hard to even think about taking a step ahead. So we kind of just pull back. And so motivational interviewing is that idea that we really meet someone where they're at, right? So if someone's saying like, I don't want help, right? But maybe if we look at like a motivation scale and 10 is the most motivated, like I do want to work on things, and 0 is like, get me out of the room, right? I don't want to be here. My parents are forcing me here. We try to talk about, where are you on that motivation scale? Now, many individuals, even when you're at a 1 or higher, you are motivated, but maybe there's just certain barriers there. And that's something to be thinking about. And a lot of times I'm that provider that helps give a little psychoeducation about what motivation looks like, normalizing the fact that it's okay that we don't feel super high on the motivation scale, but also sometimes that could stem from the fact that it probably feels really hard to even think about. And sometimes I'll start to see teens kind of give like a subtle head nod, or they start to relate to that. And we really we meet them where they're at, right? I ask teens a lot of times, hey, why don't you write down some of the goals that you want to work on? They might not even have to do with communication. Sometimes I have teens that write down, I want to be in a relationship, I want to form a new friendship, I want to finally go to a baseball game with my cousin. Like, you might not think that has to do with communication, but there's a lot of communication that has to occur to start those processes. So I think
Wow, I love this. I love that you just said that, because I'm sorry for interjecting, but I
No,
need
it's okay.
No. I need to, because when we have a teen, let's say an older child or teen, and I'm not saying some of these don't relate to younger children, but the majority are older kids and teens, and they're not motivated. So 0 to 10, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. One of the things that I've done, which is similar to what you're saying, is like, I know this particular child loves baseball, plays baseball, loves baseball, not able to play on a team yet, but loves it, plays with cousins, dad in the backyard, and even mom. They all play, and it's something he loves, but his anxiety stops him from participating. But he loves nothing more than to go to, in Philadelphia, the Phillies game. But if I present to him, like when I talk about kind of wanting to be able to communicate more, wanting to be able to do things, you see the avoidance. And we'll talk about why that is in a second. But if I said, let's say you were able to get tickets for the Phillies game, and you see the teen light up. let's call him Barry. Barry lights up. And you're like, okay, now you go to the Phillies game and you're with your older brother, and all of a sudden your brother gets a call, something really important from school or something. But you're at will call and your brother can't go up to the will call. So you need to be in line. Like that's something like you got to get the tickets. So how are you going to get the tickets? So you kind of see him kind of think and ponder. And then I say, going up and asking for tickets or even handing a note to tickets, like that probably feels super, super hard. And that could be like a 5 out of 5 for you. And you just kind of see Barry just kind of sitting there, maybe not even making eye contact, because deep down he feels ashamed by that, right? He feels like not like he feels a bit of a failure. And I'll say, well, that's why you're here. You're here so that we can help you get the tickets to see that Phillies game. So I have to identify with something so that they can see, this makes sense. Because our most unmotivated teens, assuming that they're pretty neurotypical, because kids on the autism spectrum, we tend to see lack of internal motivation for change because they don't necessarily understand that. They don't
Mhm.
see it. They may want something, but what it takes to get there is something challenging that I see in the autism spectrum disorder community. But if they're more neurotypical and they want it, that's when they start to see little light bulbs go off. And I go, that's
Yeah.
why you're here. But when a child or a teen is so avoidant, it's usually a result of not meeting them where they are, and
Right.
expecting them to do more. So over time, they become more avoidant, and or we're missing a key why that's preventing them.
That's true. I mean, I think a lot of times, like, we definitely been finding recently, like, we've been doing a lot of, further ADHD testing, some learning processing. And I think that's actually a huge component at times where kids might not even realize, or parents might not even realize that these kids or teens are having really a lot of trouble in the academic setting. And when we learn more about, oh, well, they're having trouble starting, initiating tasks, or having trouble moving from one task to the next, and maybe parents are still seeing that at home when they're doing homework, there could be something underlying that's going on that's making that more challenging.
Or they can't engage with peers at all. They're uninterested. They're not
Right.
they don't seem to want to connect internally.
Mhm.
So what
Exactly.
why is that? Is it the anxiety stopping them, or is there something else going on that's causing that? Like I'm not that interested. They don't look over a lot. They're not interested in the social dynamics. We've got to figure that out because that's more than anxiety usually.
Exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. So I think as we're talking, and I know we actually did kind of tap a little bit more into like that insight oriented aspect because that really stems more from like the psychoeducation piece, giving them kind of those words for for what's kind of going on internally. And we do also implement a lot of different like reward systems where, we think about for younger kids, maybe it's a fun sticker chart. For older teens, maybe it's more internal motivation, but maybe they are tracking some of the goals. And again, we're not tracking just for talking, but we're really honoring kind of that social communication bridge and thinking about, where were they on the bridge when they went to a restaurant, right? So sometimes I'll give like 5 stickers, for a younger child if they were comfortable telling the waiter, maybe 3 if they were comfortable telling mom or dad, and then maybe 1 if they were comfortable pointing. So we're obviously still respecting the fact that obviously communication verbally might feel scarier or harder for someone, but we also do want to, give them a reward for handing something over because for some children, that's a huge deal. And so that's why we talk a lot about how it's not just about quote unquote brave talking, because we feel like courage isn't always that loud. It could stem from more even non-verbally in the standpoint of like for some of our kids, even just walking outside and handing something over is huge, and so I do think again that insight oriented piece is really important in kind of giving them those tools, to kind of gain that insight, to gain kind of that knowledge of like, oh, this makes sense why this is a little bit more challenging for me. I see you want to add something.
Yeah, well, I think this is a really good point to make. With this is where the integration of other evidence-based treatments come in. Because
Yeah.
when you say tools, I'm thinking CBT, cognitive behavior. We do action plans, sandwich questions, I just statements. We do give my orders, looking for things in a store, interviewing, assignments. We do all sorts of copy back, like so many terms that are then broken down into something individualized for that person. An action plan. Where are you going? Who's going to be there? What can they ask? What would be your answer? What can you ask? Common questions, predicting what questions are going to be asked, writing it out, tallying it up, preparing, using visuals, a parent using, like, there's so many tools that we integrate so that each and every time they're getting it. So that's the cognitive aspect. When you're doing this and rating their feelings and realizing what they're thinking through,
Yeah.
that's cognitive behavioral therapy. That's a way of them thinking through it instead of just avoiding, and giving them a roadmap, the SM roadmap, giving them the visual of being able to know what, when, where, and how. It's all of that gives them that cognitive awareness. Now, with young children, preschoolers, early elementary, there's so much silent goals where the parents, teachers set up the world for them, how they integrate the small groups, how they integrate get-togethers, play dates, how they question, when they question, where they question, what games to play to facilitate, utilizing big shot roles. How do you utilize a big shot role? There's millions of ways. And just like you said in the beginning, the cake, I think I've often used an analogy of like a Christmas tree. At the very top is that light. That's that light that you see. But underneath, everybody's tree is different. Every individual we work with is different. No two are the same. How can the treatment plan be the same? Family dynamics are different. Their biology is different. Their development is different. Their skill set is different. There's so many differences, and there's no two that are the same. It's like millions and millions of combos that make a human. And so therefore, you need to understand how that person, who they are as a whole person, to really be able to understand them. I have a little girl. She's not so little. She's 9.5 years old. And from the time I met her, she first came to a communicamp, I believe, when she was 6. She's over her SM. She's chatty. She's, initiative, elaborative. SM is not her issue. But one thing that I noticed when I did treat her, and I just spoken to the mother the other day, that she really struggles with like being out of control, like not knowing what, when, and where. And their home is not very organized. There's not a lot of structure. From the time I treated her when she was 6, we integrated control mechanisms for her to feel secure. She had schedules of the day. She knew what in the morning her routine was. She knew her monthly schedule. She knew when the dentist was, the doctor was. She was prepared. We gave her big shot roles where she could lead something. She had a younger sister, so she would help their play dates and lead them and direct them. We integrated that into school. My point being is that's who that child is. She needs that control. So as soon as we integrate control, structure, consistency, return, predictability, giving her a role, big shot role, really helping her have, asking her opinion about something rather than telling her what she needs to do, structuring boundaries, but choices within, she thrives. So that's not going to change even when, SM is maybe not in the picture. So who is this person we're treating?
Right.
And that's the value of really getting to know your client, your patient, because then you understand. So when the parents are saying, well, this is not happening or that's happening, and you know who they are, you can explain it. And then that makes sense. And you see the parents go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. That is who she is.
Yeah.
So, the reason I brought up that 9.5-year-old is because just early this morning before this podcast, I got an email update from the mom, and she was like, you're not going to believe it. Like, she is doing so much better. She's so excited. I'm not seeing as much of a meltdown just in the few things I've implemented, because the mom is starting to go, she has to pull out those tools that she learned in her treatment that weren't even communication based. But like you said, it is communication based, because when you're a big shot and you're leading something, directing something, confident about something, your anxiety goes down and you can communicate easier.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a huge piece. And that's also why I know we've done another podcast on this, those 3 C's, but how, comfort, connection, confidence really does proceed into communication.
We
And
really are on the same wavelength, because I was just going to bring that up and you just
yeah,
did, like mother-daughter here.
like
Like,
mother-daughter,
it's
yeah.
crazy how our
We do
brains
have the
are
same
so
brain.
we really do. Everyone
Yeah.
says that. It's so
Yeah.
crazy. And how patients, when they meet you, if they've ever known me, they'll be like, wow, you're a lot like Dr. E.
Yeah.
Dr. J, Dr. Jenna.
Yeah. But
You've been doing this forever, Jen. I mean, this is
I know.
like,
That's true.
it's
Yeah.
crazy. You've been integrated since you were a little girl, from the beginning, and integrated into this. I'm just so grateful to have you as part of the Smart Center.
Oh,
But go ahead.
thank you. Thanks.
And the new director of the center, we must add.
Yes, yes, I feel grateful for that. But no, that was basically it. I was just gonna say, I think all the tools that we've been, talking about in like, pretty much like all the podcasts, but really just the last like dozen, I feel like that you and I've done. We are just like adding all these little like tidbits in there. So I do think, my hope is that today it was helpful to really like dive into all of these underlying whys, kind of also the aspect of mirroring really those stages of communication and where your child's at in all these different settings too. So another part of the evaluation process, like that initial selective mutism evaluation, or like the selective mutism interview, if you're in a state or country we're not licensed in, allows us to dive into those underlying whys, but then also tapping into, all right, well, let's talk about the social communication piece, where a child is in the home setting, in a school setting, if they're still in school, at work, if they're at work, in the real world, whether that's
But
stores,
then we break
restaurants.
down each setting, like peers,
Exactly. Yeah.
teachers, small groups, large groups.
Yeah. And then also like even other, we individualize it. So like other extracurriculars your child does. So like if they have piano lessons, or if they are part of, a spiritual group, like if they go to church, or, we do so many different types of breakdowns and we talk about those things. And so that's really what kind of that initial, again, SME, SMI is it breaks down those whys. It talks about where they are in their communication in all these various settings and with different people. And then we kind of come together and we say, okay, now this is what we recommend. So sometimes families will call and say, we've been in SM treatment for my child's whole life. Maybe they're 12. Why do I need to do like that eval? Can I just go right into treatment?
Yeah,
But,
exactly. I was going to
you
bring
know,
that up too. Like, we get
but
that a lot. Why can't I
yeah,
go to camp without an eval? It's like,
yeah.
you don't know your child.
Yeah. And I think my hope is that as listeners are kind of taking all this in, you're starting to see that benefit of like, wow, like that might be nice. Like, there's so many times where we get people doing an eval, and I'll do a lot of the SMEs and SMIs, and along with so many of our other amazing clinicians. And so many times parents afterwards will be like, oh my goodness, I can't even believe I went through certain treatments where I didn't talk about their underlying ADHD, or I didn't talk about their speech and language challenges, or I didn't talk about how my child's bilingual and doesn't feel as comfortable in the English predominant language. And we're only really using our native language with family members. But the second they go outside of that, they're shut down, right? Like, so people don't always talk about those things. But again, kind of putting everything together, that is really what that cake and that ingredient piece is all about, is we put that together for you. And so, yes, our SME is super pivotal. I use the SME in all aspects of treatment, because there's many times where you might do an SME or an SMI with one of our clinicians, and then maybe you do an intensive with me or someone else. And so I'll look at that SME if I'm not the one who completes that. If we go to camp, I always look at that SME piece, and I kind of learn more about the conceptualization. When I do a school consult, I'm looking at that. So we use that evaluation so much in our treatment, along with psychoeducation, when we do school consults, when we do professional consults, if you have a local provider, when we do all these things. And yeah.
And you can use that SME. One of the things, the value of the SME is it allows you to take that SME report, share it with your local provider. So for a family that's struggling, we don't really understand why my child isn't speaking. Why is he continuing to be mute with friends? That SME helps pull out the pieces and helps you.
Exactly.
Well, this is probably some of the reasons. Share that with your local provider. Share that with your IEP 504 school team, because it conceptualizes the value of the SME and SMI is it conceptualizes your child's presentation.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful, not expensive eval for the amount of time that goes in. And, we tell families we accept financial assistance. Like, we want to help you, because I see so many kids and so many teens and so many young adults that have gone years. And I will say something, and this is a broad statement, but it really is often true. The older the child, meaning a teen, a young adult, the older the individual, rather, that continues to have social communication challenges, the more there's a why that has been missed. It's more than being socially anxious, most likely. It's more than being a bit timid. There's
Yeah.
something else. Or if it is a social anxiety, it's very extreme and it's become, a really debilitating and avoidant. But
Mhm.
I would say it's so much more common to see these additional whys, the ADHD, the learning processing difficulties, the ASD, the speech and language that wasn't necessarily picked up or misunderstood, the sensory processing challenges. Like a lot of these are ignored or seen as separate issues, and they're not.
Yeah.
ADHD affects social communication. If that is not attended to and adjusting treatment for that individual, then you're not going to be as successful. You're not going to reach your capacity. So it's so important to know and understand to rule in or out. So I think it's, very, very important that we kind of like sum up because, my basis for this was what is SCAT? That, it's a whole person multidisciplinary approach. So SCAT is a whole person multidisciplinary approach that's grounded in the core principles of cognitive behavior therapy in so many ways and adapted to meet the unique needs of the individual with SM using a variety of evidence-based treatments that we talked on. And it goes way beyond the surface behavior of not speaking and addresses those whys and respects the stages. And it's about understanding, supporting, and guiding each individual to become the confident social communicator to reach their potential, like to
Mhm.
meet them where they are, but help them reach their potential because you don't have to remain selectively mute. This shouldn't go on years and years and years. And if it is, you're missing something.
Yeah.
It's not meant to be a slow process. So, and so much parent intensive management. I thought that, some examples just before we end is that when we're working with parents and helping them avoid certain language and to use certain language, direct language is so important versus can you or submissive language. Can you do this? Can you do that? Implies doubt. Let's do this. You were able to do that. Very direct language, helping the child or the teen become the driver in the car, helping parents step back, meeting them where they're at and teaching them that they become more of the passenger, but maybe facilitating to a degree. But we need these individuals to become confident, independent beings that aren't relying on their parent or their friends to do things. And
Mhm.
that's what it's about. It's a conceptualization and understanding, and then guiding them step by step to becoming who they can be. Anything else you want to add? Because it's so hard to articulate, but it's really not.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, yeah, I think as we wrap up, I just, again, hope that this episode was really helpful. I think that we provided a lot of different psychoeducation and information about what we do and why we do it. And you could obviously see why we're so passionate about it. But I think a lot of these kids, teens, young adults, even you as parents feel very misunderstood. And I think that we want to be the ones to tell you that we understand and we want to be, here as a guide. But we also want to be a guide for all of you to, provide to your local providers, to your family members, to your educators, whoever that might be. So definitely recommend, just kind of taking something from this, and maybe just reflecting on like, what's one thing I learned from today. And yeah, we're excited to continue to provide more insight in future podcasts. So thank you for taking a listen. And yeah, that's really what I wanted to say.
And if you have any questions, any thoughts, please write to us. You can write to support@selectivemutismcenter.org. Reference the podcast. There will be show notes to this. Also, we have a wonderful search bar on selectivemutismcenter.org. It's a little like it looks like a magnifying glass at the top of the website. Go to that magnifying glass, put in a word, a comment, something that you want to learn more about bridge, teens, ADHD, autism, testing, parents, whatever the words are. And then what'll happen is when you click that search, you're going to get so many resources that pop up that have those words in it. Because we have so many resources via the blog, via the podcast, via handouts, webinars. I mean, so many. And so it's impossible to just click on something and find it. You may need to just use that search bar to really find all the resources in a topic that you want. And if there's a topic you would like us to talk more about, please email us. We're always wanting to do topics to help you better understand and support you in this journey to overcoming SM and reaching, your child or your potential for that matter, if you're an adult listening. Thank you, listeners. Thank you for listening to Unspoken Words, a Selective Mutism podcast hosted by me, Dr. E, and the Smart Center. This episode and all episodes of Unspoken Words is produced by New Edition Productions. Don't forget to submit any questions you have from today's episode using our Ask Dr. E form on our website. Just head to selectivemutismcenter.org/ask DRE. I'd love to answer your question in a future episode or blog post. Remember, for the best of this episode and every episode of Unspoken Words, please follow the podcast on Instagram and YouTube. We are at Unspoken Words _podcast on Instagram and Unspoken Words by DRE on YouTube. Or join our newsletter for additional SM content. We release new episodes every other Monday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll see you next time.